Well, this is the era of hardware launch. Like, there's nothing, and then all of a sudden, all the hardware launches at once. And this one I've been using for a week and a half, 2 weeks now. Everything's been going pretty well, but I just got the box. So it's another one. It's the same because I like using dual monitors that match. Yes, that's right. It's the Pixio PX279P. P for Prime. Now, Pixio is a really interesting monitor. They have always been value oriented. You know, I used to import monitors from Korea because crazy. There's a lot of you that are still rocking the AMH399. It's time to let it go. That was like, man, those panels. I mean, they're pretty awesome, but you know, they're not a 10-year monitor. These have a higher build quality in general. They're meant to last a little bit longer, but Pixio really does give you the choice of, you can sort of pick exactly which panel you want in terms of color accuracy at one end of the spectrum, or like speed and gaming stuff at the other end of the spectrum, and they'll let you have sort of whatever package you want. This is the PX279P, P for Prime, so a little higher image quality, but we're gonna take a look, and that's why I've got all this accoutrement set up on the desk here. All right, so first up on this monitor, the first thing you notice, it's fit and finish. It has a powder-coated metal base and stand. It is not height adjustable, but it is tilt adjustable. It has VESA mounting holes, 100mm, if you're gonna put it on a monitor arm or something like that. It does have an external power brick. So if you've got a monitor arm, you save a little bit of weight having the external power brick, which is maybe nice depending on what your monitor arm setup is gonna be. Or the downside is you've got a brick that you have to keep up with and it's not built into the monitor. On the bottom, you have two HDMI inputs. One is a 240 Hz input, the other one is 120 Hz input. It's HDMI 2.0 and HDMI 1.2. And then you have a DisplayPort 1.2 input as well. There's an analog audio, a USB service port, and then of course the power jack. The rest of the fit and finish of the monitor, it's pretty bog standard. We have a nice matte finish on the display. It has a plastic bezel and rear case. It's got a little bit of the gamer aesthetic going. There's a vent along the top of the monitor. You get a nice sort of Pixio. It's sort of an embossed plastic, so it doesn't pick up fingerprints or anything like that. And then you get some of the gamer lines, the gamer aesthetic. You know, it looks pretty cool from the back, I guess, if you're into this kind of an aesthetic. Now, when the monitor is off, in terms of the aesthetic, you look at it and you say, wow, there's no bezel at all. It's just a little bit at the bottom. That's just Pixio's design. When it's off, you can't really see the bezel. The bezel is hidden. But when you turn the display on, you do have a little bit more margin around the display than it would look like if you're just looking at the display when it's off. But when it's off, it does look sharp. The monitor controls are a 4-way hat switch with a hat button, so this is pretty standard if you've seen other Pixio monitors. It is pretty intuitive, it's easier to get used to. It's definitely much easier than the array of buttons menu interface that some other monitors have, but enough about that. Let's see how it performs. So we have something interesting going on. So I'm doing a test signal at a 1080p 60 Hz refresh rate. And we can see here that it takes 12.4 milliseconds, about almost 1/60th of a second, but not quite, a little less, before our frame starts to be displayed. Now normally with a 60 Hz refresh rate monitor, it actually takes 1/60th of a second for the lines to be drawn from the top of the display to the bottom of the display. However, with this display, 12.4 milliseconds, keep in mind, to 17.2 milliseconds, it's taking only a fraction of time to draw the frame from bottom to top. So what that tells me is this display is actually buffering the frame until the frame is fully drawn into the buffer, and then the display displays the frame as fast as the panel allows, because this is up to 240 Hz. So again, even though I'm sending it a test signal at 60 Hz, it's actually buffering the frame until it can display the frame in 1/240th of a second, or just a few milliseconds. This is pretty slick because this is an approach that really high-end monitor manufacturers like Asus take with their really high-end gaming displays. So nice job, Pixio. Now this is the 120 Hz input. So if it tracks, we'll see a little bit of latency here. Again, 12.5 milliseconds. And then the bottom 17.5 milliseconds. So yeah, it takes a little longer to display. This is a different HDMI input. This is the 120 Hz HDMI input. So we can see that this input is also buffered similarly. Now to be honest, I'm not sure what I would recommend. It depends on what kind of a gamer you are, I guess, as to whether I'd recommend, you know, if your video card can't push 240 Hz, what would I recommend for which input you use? And I think it's going to be the 240 hertz input all the time. Even if you're only running at 60, 70 FPS, use that input. Now, what about features of the display itself? First off, is it truly 240 hertz? That's one of the things that I always like to try to test. The panel itself is not quite 240 hertz. The way that you can tell is these chase squares. When these chase squares are being displayed, I set the shutter speed on the camera to 1/500th of a second, which is a little less than twice the frame rate of the monitor. And in almost all cases, I can see 2 squares illuminated at a time. So that means that while the pixels are coming on in 1/240th of a second in one square, the pixels are going off in another square in 1/240th of a second. And that doesn't happen instantaneously. The only display panel type where it does happen instantaneously is OLED type displays, where each pixel basically is emitting its own light. These displays have backlights, and it takes a little while before the liquid crystal can actually change states. That said, there is a lot of wizardry in these displays to make them go faster. So in the on-screen menus and in the electronics of the display, there's overdriver, where the display will attempt to compensate for the fact that the panel doesn't respond quickly enough by overshooting or undershooting. The problem is that when you are scrolling text on the display or doing other non-gaming tasks, it can make the display not look great. So I experimented with that for a little bit, and I sort of found that having it on does actually help. You get a little bit of like a gray shadow with really black text on a really white screen, but I didn't find it super distracting. With that setting, the chase squares in the high-speed footage was really the best that I could get out of the display. Don't get me wrong, having a panel that's on the order of 100 hertz, I think, between 100 and 110 hertz when you do the math and you count squares and you do a little bit of averaging, is not bad. I mean, it'll accept an input signal at 240 hertz, sure, and it will start to display that signal in 1/240th of a second. It just takes a little longer for the image to fade out than it does to display the all-new image. It's not bad, though. So in case you hadn't, sort of pieced it together, this is a 1080p display, 1080p 240 hertz, DisplayPort 1.2, HDMI 2.0, and HDMI 1.2. It does have a 3-year warranty from Pixio. So if you're into, product registration and something happens with this display, Pixio is going to stand by it for 3 years, which is really pretty awesome, versus, say, importing a monitor. There's a lot of people that their AMH 399 died. I know I put a lot of miles on mine, and it's got some problems. It still works, but it's got some problems. Unlike the Pixios, which have really held together well. See what I did there? Now there are some other cool features in the on-screen display, things like an on-screen FPS counter, on-screen crosshairs, and other features that you would find only really in higher-end displays. It does come with FreeSync, but you have to turn FreeSync on in the menus. FreeSync is not on by default. And I think the reason for that is because when you turn FreeSync on, it'll actually make some of these tests that I'm doing a little worse because of the FreeSync overhead or because it's waiting on FreeSync to do stuff. I had the best FreeSync experience with this monitor running at about 50 hertz to 150 hertz, something like that. I mean, with FreeSync, there's a little bit of a trade-off depending on whatever your frame rate is and some of the other stuff that you're doing. I think if you turn VSync on, but you're running the display at 240 hertz, you're going to have probably a little better experience than with FreeSync on. And that sounds kind of strange, but unless your video card is having trouble pushing 60 FPS, I don't think FreeSync really makes sense on this monitor. If you're playing some other kind of a game, you got a higher end graphics card or an esports title, and you're running at like 150, 200 hertz, or you're playing like CSGO or something, don't even bother with FreeSync. You can turn VSync on, but actually run the display at 240 hertz or 144 hertz or any one of the other number of refresh rates that it supports right out of the box. Exploring the details of that might actually be a different video, but it's not that Pixio has done anything wrong, it's just that's how FreeSync works. Now, in terms of color accuracy and color gamut and all that kind of stuff, we've got a Spider 5 and we just used DisplayCal to get the color calibration. You can see on the screen, it's not bad. I mean, for a gaming monitor, this is actually pretty good. I've got the color calibration profile for my particular display. It's on the Level 1 forums. Do note, however, there was a weird thing that happened. When I first got it out of the box and went to calibrate it, I sort of calibrated it after it had only been on for an hour. And then I recalibrated it again later after I'd been using it for like a week. And when you use this thing for like a week, the color calibration profile changed a little bit. So I think the initial, like right out of the box, I didn't give it enough time to warm up, which is something you got to worry about a little bit if you're using a display calibration thing. But subsequently, you know, turning it off and then turning it back on and just sort of letting it settle, it wasn't as all over the place as it was during the initial setup. So I think that must have just been something with the initial calibration that I did, because I was never really able to reproduce that. And visually, I never saw a problem with it, like looking at the colors or color accuracy or shift or anything like that. Not really an issue because of the type of panel that this is. Let's spin a quick look at the Pixio PX279P, the Prime 1080p display. 27 inches, 3-year warranty, pretty well packed. It's got the gamer aesthetic and some of the higher end gamer features, 240 hertz. That's all you need to know in a nutshell. It is exactly what it is advertised to be, and it's well built, and you get a 3-year warranty. And the picture quality is pretty good considering it's a gaming monitor, so not bad. Color calibration on the Level 1 forums. What more is there to say? I'm Wendell, this is Level 1, I'm signing out, and I'll see you later.